The room was silent as my brother Lucas sat across from me, a smug look on his face. Our father, George, had passed away a week ago. He'd always been a hard man, distant, but with a sense of fairness that I believed would extend to his will. We were both expecting to inherit something. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to give us a fresh start. When the lawyer read my father's will, the reality hit me like a slap in the face. David, you have been left nothing. All of your father's estate has been bequeathed to your brother and stepmother, Susan. I could feel the blood rush to my face. I had heard the words, but they didn't make sense. I looked at Lucas, who was beaming. Susan, sitting next to him, didn't even try to hide her smirk. My stomach twisted in knots. My father had always promised me a fair share. Why would he do this? Is this a mistake? I blurted out. The lawyer didn't even look up, nodding slowly. I'm afraid not. Your father's wishes are very clear. I didn't speak for a long time. I couldn't. My head was spinning, and a storm of emotions raged inside me. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. How could this be true? Had my father really cut me out completely? But something didn't add up. My father had always been careful with his words. He wouldn't have left me completely penniless, would he? There had to be more to it. As I sat there, trying to process what had just happened, I remembered something that had slipped my mind earlier. My father had made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I would go through his safe deposit box in the bank. I had to find out what was in there. The next morning, I stood in the doorway of my father's study, a room I hadn't stepped into since he passed away. The scent of old leather and polished wood filled the air, a faint trace of cigarette smoke lingering, a reminder of how often he used to sit at that desk. I had spent hours here as a kid, listening to him talk about his life, the importance of family, and how we should always look out for each other. But now, the study felt like a tomb. Everything was just as he left it, but the emptiness of the room was suffocating. My fingers brushed over the desk, the mahogany surface smooth beneath my touch. I knew that my father had a hidden compartment. In one of the drawers, it was something he'd always talked about, but I had never seen it. Taking a deep breath, I began to search. I pulled out the old papers and files, each one carrying the weight of his life's work. Then I found it, tucked away in the back of the top drawer, a small wooden box. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't believe I had actually found it. I opened it, carefully lifting the lid, and inside was a small brass key. There was nothing else, no letter, no explanation, just the key. I stared at it, confused. What was this for? I knew it wasn't the key to any of his safes. I'd seen those before. This was something different. It was old, worn, and seemed almost out of place among the other items in the box. I grabbed my coat and made my way to the bank, clutching the key tightly in my hand. I wasn't sure what I was going to find, but I knew I had to know. The bank manager was a man I'd known for years, a friendly face who had always been kind to me. When I explained the situation, he led me to the safe deposit boxes in the back of the building. He pulled out a drawer that seemed to be the right size, and then, with a careful twist, he unlocked it. The contents inside were more than I could have ever expected. The moment I opened the ledger, I knew it was important. The old leather-bound book was worn and fragile, as if it had been opened and closed hundreds of times. My fingers shook as I flipped through the pages. The entries were meticulous, detailed accounts of various transactions, properties, and investments. It was as if my father had been keeping a record of every penny he'd ever spent or earned. But that wasn't the part that caught my attention. On the very last page there was a single, handwritten note from my father. "David, I know what you're going to think, but you must trust me. I've left everything for you, except what you think you deserve. The rest is with the lawyer. The truth will come out soon. Don't let them fool you. Trust no one." I read the note again, this time feeling the weight of the words settle heavily in my chest. What did he mean by this? Why had he kept this a secret from everyone, even Lucas? It didn't make sense. I had to get to the lawyer. I called my lawyer Thomas, the man who had worked with my father for years. He was the only person I could trust. When I explained what I had found, he agreed to meet with me the next day. When I arrived at Thomas's office, I handed him the ledger and the key. His face grew pale as he read the note. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with disbelief. "David, your father made a last-minute change to the will," he said quietly. "He didn't want anyone to know about it, especially Lucas and Susan. But it's all here. The estate is yours. Your father left everything to you except for the portion he gave to Susan for reasons that are unclear." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was short-lived. I couldn't help but wonder, why would my father have kept this a secret for so long? What had Lucas and Susan done to manipulate him? Thomas hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. "David, there's more. I've been instructed to keep this part of the will sealed until the right time, but your father, he had suspicions. He suspected that Lucas and Susan were trying to take everything from you. This is his way of making sure you get what you deserve." The day of the confrontation finally arrived. I knew I had to go to Lucas's house. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about my father's legacy, his wishes, and the betrayal I had suffered. I had spent too many years feeling like I was never good enough, always overshadowed by Lucas's constant boasting. But this time, I had the upper hand. When I arrived at their home, I found Lucas sitting in the living room, casually sipping his coffee. Susan was there too, her eyes darting between us, trying to gauge the situation. "I know what you did," I said, my voice steady but filled with anger. "You manipulated Dad into leaving me nothing. You thought you could get away with it." Lucas didn't even flinch. "You think this is about the money? You're pathetic, David. We're family. Everything your father left is rightfully ours. You didn't deserve a penny." My hands clenched into fists. "You're wrong. My father didn't leave everything to you. He left it to me. You lied to everyone, and now you're going to pay for it." Susan scoffed. "You're just bitter, David. This is all in the past. Move on." "No," I shot back. "You don't get to just walk away from this. You're going to face the consequences of your actions." At that moment, Lucas stood up, his face contorted with rage. "You're nothing. You always have been. We didn't need you, and we still don't. Get out." I turned on my heel and walked out of the house, but as I did, I knew that this wasn't over. The battle was just beginning. The following days were a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and mounting tension. I had already made it clear to Lucas and Susan that I wasn't backing down. But deep down, I knew that this wasn't just about getting my share, it was about something much bigger. My father had left me a message, a warning that something had been kept hidden, and I was determined to find it. Thomas had been working tirelessly on my behalf, but even he was surprised by what we discovered next. One evening, as I sat in his office, we were going through my father's financial records when something caught my eye. In a small, nondescript envelope buried under piles of paperwork was a document marked with my father's signature. It was a trust agreement, one that neither Lucas nor Susan knew about. Thomas carefully read through the document, his face growing more and more serious. "David, this is incredible. Your father set up a trust in your name, a secret one. It was meant to keep you financially secure, no matter what happened with the rest of the estate." I leaned forward, my heart racing. What kind of trust? Why didn't he tell me about it? "It's a discretionary trust," Thomas explained. "Your father's assets were placed in this trust, and the trustee has the power to release funds to you at their discretion. But there's more. He put in a clause that states, if the other beneficiaries contest your inheritance, the trust will be fully activated, and the entire estate will go to you." I was stunned. "So, everything that Lucas and Susan think they've won. It's not theirs?" Thomas nodded. "Exactly. Your father knew they would try to take everything from you. This was his way of ensuring they couldn't." I felt a mix of relief and fury. My father had known what was going to happen. He had expected it. But what kind of person does that? And why had he kept me in the dark all this time? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that they had betrayed me, tried to erase me from my own family history. They thought they could get away with it. But now I had the upper hand. I decided to confront them once again, this time with undeniable proof that everything they thought was theirs was about to be taken from them. The day of the hearing arrived, and I stood outside the courtroom trying to steady my nerves. This was it, the final showdown. Lucas and Susan were already inside, sitting in their seats, looking smug as always. I could feel their eyes on me, and it took everything in me to walk into that room with my head held high. When the judge entered and the proceedings began, I knew I had to be calm and collected. The evidence was clear. I had the trust agreement, my father's handwritten note, and the lawyer's testimony. Everything pointed to one truth. Lucas and Susan had tried to steal from me. The courtroom was filled with tension as Thomas stood up and presented the documents. "Your Honor," he began, "the late George Harris had a trust in place that specifically names David Harris as the beneficiary. The will that was read last week was not the complete will. It was only a partial version." Lucas's lawyer stood up, ready to argue. "This is absurd. That trust was never disclosed to anyone. It's invalid. We have the original will, and that's the only legal document that matters." The judge raised an eyebrow. "We'll see about that," Thomas continued. "There is also the matter of the clause in the trust, which stipulates that if the other beneficiaries, namely, Mr. Harris's son, Mr. Lucas Harris, and his wife, Susan Harris, contest the inheritance, the trust will be fully activated, and the entire estate will go to Mr. David Harris." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The look on Lucas's face was one of disbelief, mixed with anger. He tried to stand, but the judge quickly called for order. "I don't believe it," Lucas spat. "You can't do this. This isn't fair." "It's not about fairness, Lucas," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It's about what's right. You tried to steal from me, and now you'll face the consequences." Susan, who had been silent until now, stood up and yelled, "This is all lies. We have every right to what's ours." But the judge wasn't having it. He nodded at Thomas. "I'll review the documents and make my ruling. This court is adjourned." As I walked out of the courtroom, I could feel the weight of what had just happened. But I also knew that the hardest part was still to come. I wasn't done with them yet, not by a long shot. The days leading up to the judge's ruling were agonizing. I spent sleepless nights thinking about everything that had happened. How had it come to this? How had my own family turned on me like this? The betrayal felt like a wound that would never heal, but I had to stay strong. When the ruling was finally delivered, it was clear. The judge upheld the trust agreement, and the will that Lucas and Susan had been so eager to claim was ruled invalid. All of my father's estate would now pass to me, as per his wishes. Lucas and Susan were stunned. They tried to argue, but it was no use. The court had made its decision, and the truth had come to light. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. The battle had been long, but it had been worth it. I had fought for what was mine, and I had won. After the judge's ruling, everything changed. As I sat in my father's old house, surrounded by his belongings, it felt surreal. Lucas and Susan had been left with nothing. The estate was mine, and I had every right to it. But it didn't feel like a victory. At least, not in the way I'd imagined. It felt like a closing chapter, one that I had waited years for. I had gone through the motions of sorting out the house, organizing the inheritance, and making sure everything was handled according to the will and trust. But none of it mattered. What truly mattered was the people who had betrayed me, and the karmic resolution that came to them in the end. Lucas and Susan had spent weeks trying to fight the ruling, but they never succeeded. They were finally forced to face the truth. They had lied, they had schemed, and now they had lost. The money, the house, the cars, and all the assets that they thought were theirs were now gone. It wasn't the wealth that brought me satisfaction. It was watching them squirm, knowing that they had been caught in their own web of deceit. They had tried to ruin me, to erase me from my father's life, but in the end, it was them who were left with nothing. Their reputations were in shambles, and the community began to distance themselves from them, as word spread about what they had done. Lucas lost his business due to the legal battles, and Susan, once so sure of her place in the family, found herself alone and isolated. They both tried to reach out to me after the ruling, but I refused to respond. They had made their choice, and now they would live with the consequences of their actions. As for me, I chose to honor my father's memory in the way he had always wanted. I didn't want to let this inheritance turn me into someone bitter or vengeful. Instead, I used my newfound wealth to start fresh, to rebuild my life on my terms. I donated a portion of the estate to charity, something my father would have been proud of. And I made sure to keep his legacy alive, not through the possessions he left behind, but through the values he instilled in me. I also took the time to repair the relationships that mattered, those with my friends, my true family, and even myself. I had spent so many years living in the shadow of what my father wanted for me. But now, I was living for myself. In the end, I realized that the real victory wasn't about who got what or who had the last word. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against me. I had faced betrayal, manipulation, and greed, and I had come out on top. But the most important thing I gained was peace. Peace knowing that my father's wishes had been honored, and peace knowing that I had finally stood up for myself. As I sat in my father's study, the place where it all began, I looked at the old brass key that had started this whole journey. It was no longer just a symbol of the past, but of my strength and resilience. My father had trusted me, and I had trusted in the truth. That, in the end, was all that mattered. Author's note: this story was one of betrayal, deception, and ultimately, The triumph of truth. Through every twist and turn, the protagonist not only regained what was rightfully theirs, but also found inner peace. The power of karma lies in its ability to bring justice in ways that are often more fulfilling than any material reward. In the end, the true victory is about standing strong, holding on to integrity, and never letting the actions of others define who you are.